I am Ashley Hunter with HMS Group, and I get the pleasure of spending 20 minutes interviewing these two amazing ladies, Valarie McCall and Alison Gross. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can kind of get into the conversation.
Well, we only have 20 minutes, so I'll be brief because I could take all 20 minutes. Now, I'm Valarie McCall, Chief of Communications, Government, and International Affairs for the City of Cleveland. I serve the longest serving mayor in the history of the City of Cleveland. We're a partner, and it's a pleasure to be here. And we can talk about more about what I do later.
Okay, and I'm Alison Gross. I've spent about the last 15 years working in the insurance industry, where I've worked with boards, executives, various levels in the industry. And during that time, I've witnessed varying degrees of company initiatives on diversity and inclusion, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yes, so why don't we just ask the first question, why in the world is it taking so long for these businesses to recognize and actually want to implement gender and diversity? Why is that now becoming an issue?
You want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very happy to go first. Asha, who couldn't be with us today, I thought summed something up very cleverly, and she said she'll delineate into two parts, that the diversity is the recruiting and the inclusion is then the retention and growth. And I think where we've struggled, and particularly in the industry that I've worked in, has been in the recruiting. So with the best of intentions at board level and at the level of the executives of the companies to be able to say, okay, yes, we want to do this. And then it goes to the head of human resources, who in my experience would normally sit at that table and would be at the board meetings and would be a part of the C-suite. What happens next is where I see it get scrappy, and where you don't find that, as I said, the best of intentions following through to, okay, how do we do our recruiting? Which colleges do we go to? What sort of people are we talking to? And I don't feel, in my experience, that I've seen the training go down to the recruiters. And, you know, those of you who've worked in any kind of recruiting or in any kind of HR may have seen, you know, the table that shows up with the table skirt and the pull-up banner, which probably hasn't been changed since 1986, and we're all looking at it and going, oh gosh, not again. So I think that it's in the implementation, and I'll give you a couple of examples from my experience. Daughter of a very good friend of mine who went to Cambridge and came out with a first in math and never saw or spoke to anybody from the insurance industry. And I'm thinking, the actuaries, you know, math, these things that I would have thought she would have been a perfect candidate for, nobody went to talk to her. And I think another example, more importantly, here in the States, where so much of the industry, the insurance industry, is talking about climate change. I have a friend who is doing a PhD in anthropology. Very interesting study, studying how climate change affects populations. And again, nobody in recruiting for the insurance industry, although they are studying climate change and studying the impact on populations and on industries and on what the industry needs to do to support businesses in parts of the country where there's serious issues because of weather, and whether you want to call it climate change or not, but whether there's weather catastrophe. Here is an opportunity where there's a whole group of women who aren't even thought about in terms of, well, here's an interesting twist. Here's an interesting opportunity. Maybe we should be rethinking where our recruiting is coming from. And I see that as the gap the gap between the best of intentions and the stuff that gets written. And, you know, I have to say, I will lay that right there on the desks of the heads of HR and recruiting for not thinking about how do I actually make change happen.
So I guess I was lucky since I was recruited from a music student. As a music student.
You are the anomaly that proves the success of having women in insurance.
Well, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you know what, I want to piggyback off of what you were saying and go in a different direction. So yes, I work in government. So of course, we can't say we're doing everything for our residents. City of Cleveland is a very diverse city and a very diverse state and a very diverse county. And I always say, if you want to understand the melting pot, you got to look at Northeast Ohio in the region of Cleveland. I mean, we are a city built by immigrants and very diverse community. I mean, people are proud of where they come from. And so we are diverse. However, you know, and in our administration, you don't have to ask how many women were in Mayor Jackson's cabinet or how many Black females or different ethnicities. You can see it. It's a snapshot. But what I will talk about is one of the things I've had the pleasure of doing is sitting on a lot of boards. And to your point about, we talk about it, we write about it, we all just went through the whole thing that we will call the civil unrest, and everybody came out with a D&I statement and are reaffirming our commitment to diversity and inclusion and equity and all those great things. And I'm not going to name the boards, but there are two boards in particular that I've been sitting on as a representative of our mayor for the last couple of years. And for 16 years, because he's been mayor for 16 years, there's not been one person of minority descent, and there's not been one female chair of either of those two boards. And so for a period of time, I would raise it like, okay, you know, hey, you know, there are females on the board, there are people who are minorities. And it's like, oh yeah, we hear you, we're gonna do something about it, we're committed to it. And the last time that the two elections happened for both elections of the new board, somebody said, you're not gonna raise your thing again? I said, no, because I shouldn't have to. And so if you think about, you know, how long, why is it taking so long? We were joking when we did our pre-conference call, and I said, you know, hurry up already. And I didn't say it that way. I said it a little bit more aggressively. But the point is it's that, you know, we're either going to be serious about it or we're not going to be serious about it. And I want to connect it to give an example. We've all had this example, and we've talked about this. You've been in a meeting, you've been in a boardroom meeting, you've been somewhere, you have a suggestion, you raise your hand and you come up with an idea and you think it's a great idea. So you put your idea out there and you throw it out there, and it's, I was gonna say piss on cotton, quiet, right? Nobody says anything. It's piss on cotton. Before you can blink, your person to your right, and obviously the person who suggested is a female, the person to the right says exactly what you said, almost verbatim. And it's like, I know that's the suggestion I just made. And if for females, we've been in that situation. If you have not been in that situation, then you're lucky. And if you have been in that situation, the first few times, what do? And then the third time, you know, you come back a couple of times and you say, wait, thank you, Bob, Billy, for, you know, backing up my recommendation. But our one friend had a comment, and she said, you know, sometimes you need that other person, you need that white male to come back and say, you know what? That was a great recommendation. I'm glad you gave it. Let's move on. And so we have to start changing our thinking, our doing, our being. It cannot just be a mission statement. It cannot just be a diversity statement. It has to be about, it has to start from the boardroom and go all the way down. It has to be a culture, almost like a shock change to the organization. And it has to be meant, and it's got to be felt, then it's got to be implemented, and it's got to be regurgitated over and over again until we don't have to talk about diversity. It's what we do.
So my question then is, how do you get the board involved? How, I mean, like, let's just say you're in the trenches, right? You're middle management. Not every, now, I am a person that has no problem going to the CEO's office. Probably why I don't work in corporate America anymore. But how do you actually engage? How do you know, how does one do that? I mean, it's easy for us to say that you need to go to, you need to catch their attention, but how does one do that?
I actually, honestly, at the board level and higher, in my opinion, at the C-suite level and higher, it's not up to lower management. That should not be put on lower management to do that. I think I think that's not right to put that pressure down. That pressure has to come from the stakeholders. That pressure has to come from that board. That pressure has to come from people outside looking in. We were joking. We came up with a list of questions. We came up with a list of questions, right? And that we were going to ask each other. And then we said, you know what? These are questions that we should throw out to the audience, that they should go back and ask themselves, right? So maybe there's a list of diversity checklist questions that all board members have to go through. But I think it should be the community putting that back on them. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you guys saw this in the news. Peloton is going through something right now. A little something. And you wouldn't have known that. They're being challenged by their diversity employees to uphold to their diversity statement and their diversity, and it's seeped outside of them having these discussions. It's equity pay, it's everything we're talking about today. And it has seeped out to the point that it might be impacting their sales. And so I think that the external people have to put that pressure back on them. Stakeholders have to put that pressure back on them, and investors have to put that pressure back on it. And then ultimately, consumers have to put that pressure back on them.
I mean, in the previous sessions where it was talking about investing and ESG investing, the phrase for talking but not quite doing things, should we say, right, putting it that way. And the phrase, of course, is greenwashing. And I think that what we're seeing and the worry here is, why is gender equality taking so long? Is that the gender equality question has got its own version of greenwashing. That it's very easy for a company to say, yes, we're doing it. And yes, we've spent the last 6 months and we've redone our values, and the values of, here they are, and we printing it out and putting it on everyone's desk. And now, of course, there's COVID, so now we're emailing it to everybody, and it's your new screensaver. But the implementation of how do we actually do that? Is anybody actually thinking about, how do I get from where we are now to where we need to be, if I'm not actively looking at who am I hiring, and then who are the potential who are the potential women who I've got in coming up through middle management. I think boards are very happy to talk about succession planning and to talk about the future. But I think when you get into line management and that middle, that I'm not quite sure that it happens. And, we can hypothesize and say, well, maybe people don't want to talk about a succession plan for their own position. Or maybe they don't want to look at, is it going to be threatening? That there are really smart women in the room who I can see are coming up through the ranks. But I think that there's a real lack of accountability to say, it's got to be measurable. Show us what you're doing. And to your point, Val, to say, okay, if it's a consumer business, let the consumers answer. If it's a business to business, let those questions be asked when contracts are being written. To say, well, hold on a minute, I've got my terms and conditions. Let me put this one in here. Because that way, I think it's going to make somebody stop in their tracks and go, you know what? We're still talking about this. We've not actually made it happen. Whether it's at the, the mid-level, whether it's at the country level, when you're talking about massive corporations, whether they're looking at it, in terms of their line of business, whether they're looking at it in terms of regionally, and certainly in some parts of the country or in some parts of the world, it may very well be harder to approach how you get gender equality. But until you are saying, okay, you're accountable, let's see the steps that you are going to take, I think, yeah, we're going to be having this conversation same time next year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, from the standpoint of allyship, and, we talk a lot about needing allies as far as men are concerned. Have you seen that change or not, or is it helpful? How have things changed as far, because we've had a lot of conversations around,
I mean, I could tell you, from my opinion, I think that there are people who really do support that, and you can see it in their organizations. Again, I can tell you, I'm visualizing my colleagues that I work with. They're women, they're men, we have the gamut of diversity. So yes, I see it in my workplace. But it's beyond that, right? That's just our workplace. We have to go to boards, we have to go outside of those organizations. We represent a city in a magnitude of ways, but I am still sometimes the only minority person in certain settings or in certain rooms that may not be our cabinet meeting. And so that means that those thoughts outside of that room, for example, I mean, this is deeper than that. You really start getting into equity and you start talking about urban development and you start looking at how some of these neighborhoods were built. And there was a whole conversation when President Biden first came into office around looking at neighborhoods that had highways and freeways that go through them. And now looking at how you take those freeways out of those neighborhoods. Well, that's another whole conversation, right? But it gets into some versions of diversity and equity as well. But I wanted to touch on something because I didn't expect it, but when Anthony Scammucci was here earlier today, and he was laying out some points that I didn't expect. And if people didn't see his comments, they should go back and look at his session from this morning. But he was a couple things. We're talking about how we have a climate crisis. We know we have an economic equality crisis issue that goes with the D&I conversation. We still have racial and discriminatory issues. We cannot ignore those. And we're on the bridge of a democracy cluster thing. I'll just say it that way. And if you think about all of those things collective together, the very thing that can help us get out of all of that and is diversifying, right? Gender equality, diversity of thought. And the more we diversify in all of everything that we do, all of our lives, then we will help to diversify the outcome of some of these things that we're dealing with on a regular basis.
Well, Alison, because I know our time is escaping us, do you have any final thoughts or takeaways that, I'm sure we have a lot of people who are hiring, looking to hire, and how do they change it up?
Yeah, I think it's really looking at thinking out of the box, which is, it's easy for me to say sitting here on stage, but I think that there are some phenomenal opportunities. One of the speakers this morning was talking, a speaker from Google, saying they suddenly realized that their main criteria, which had been college degree, they didn't actually need it for some positions, and they took it off. And it completely changed how they're looking at hiring. I think when we look at inner cities and we look at areas of the country where there really needs to be help for communities of color, communities that need additional help, I think that those of us in industries should be able to say, well, there's a gap. If there's a phenomenal school and there's stuff been done in and around the New York area of some really strong schools that have brought kids up into areas that they wouldn't have, areas of education they wouldn't have been able to reach before, then what's the next step? Is there a gap between inner city schooling and education and the hiring piece? What are the criteria for hiring? And should industries be looking at their onboarding criteria to say, actually, I can make a difference if I try something different?
Well, I would like to thank both of you for your time this afternoon. This is what I've always wanted to be. I kind of always wanted to be Oprah. So you all are fulfilling my dream. So thank you both.
Did we get a car?
Yes.
Is there a car under our chair?
You do get a car.